This is Declarations.
My declaration is pretty straightforward. Very simply, to make all human interactions meaningful, even the most mundane and routine human interactions.
Hi, this is Todd Rich, and welcome to the Declarations podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to engage with thought leaders in investing who provide an independent perspective. Our goals are to explore the foundations behind their success, to understand the source of their inspiration, and, through these conversations, to become better investors. We hope you enjoy this episode. Today, we are excited to welcome Fred Klein. Fred is a seasoned real estate attorney here in the Washington D.C. region, currently serving as senior counsel at DLA Piper. And in many ways, he is the dean of the real estate industry. Fred's long and distinguished career began when he clerked for Judge Paul Roney on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 5th and 11th Circuits. He then joined Shaw Pittman in the early 1980s, where he transitioned into real estate law. From Shaw Pittman, he moved over to DLA Piper, where he served as partner and is now senior counsel. Throughout his career, Fred has represented a diverse clientele, handling all facets of the real estate transaction. More than just an attorney, Fred is regarded for his ability to create deep relationships and utilize his personal skills to deftly negotiate all kinds of complex situations in a way that often leaves all sides feeling satisfied. On a personal note, I want to credit Fred for his help in connecting me with my partner, David Rubenstein, the co-founder of Carlyle and the anchor investor of Declaration Partners. Beyond his legal career, Fred and his wife Jill are deeply committed to community service. Importantly, Fred gives his time as well as his resources to organizations such as the Children's Law Center, the National Theater, and his alma mater, the Mercersburg Academy. Fred and I share a love of books and of baseball, and I'm proud to call him a friend and a mentor. Fred, welcome to the podcasts.
Thank you, Todd. Really happy to be here, so let's go.
All right, let's do it. Well, as you know, we named our business after the Declaration of Independence, which in my view is a document that lays out the foundation for American society, as well as our aspirations for the future. So Fred, what is your declaration?
Todd, my declaration is pretty straightforward. Very simply, to make all human interactions meaningful, even the most mundane and routine human interactions. And I suppose I learned this philosophy from two primary people. First, my dad, and second, our longtime client and my friend Ray Ritchie.
And my friend as well, by the way.
Our friend Ray Ritchie, who opened the Boston Properties office in Washington, D.C. around 1979. And I remember one particular instance that really struck me, and that was the day when we were together walking into one of Boston Properties' dozens of buildings that it owned at the time in downtown Washington. And Ray greeted the security guard at the entrance to the building by name.
As he always does.
Knew his name. Always. He not only knew his name, Todd, but he remembered that the person's wife had had some recent surgery, and he asked her how she was doing. Now, that wasn't fake. That was real. That was sincere. That was honest. That was meaningful. And I learned so much from that particular situation, how Ray values his relationships and makes everyone who he comes across feels valued, feels important to him, and by extension, to his company. And it's not just the CEO who may be interested in renting 200,000 square feet in Ray's next development. It's the security guard who maybe is the face of that building for Boston Properties. So that is really my declaration, a mantra that I try to live by, and I employ at all levels and at all times.
Fred, how do you make all human interactions meaningful? You gave a great story about how someone else did it and it inspired you, but how do you do that in everyday life?
I'm very conscious of each situation and who I'm talking to at all times. I've been at this game for a long time, for many decades, and sometimes I find myself opposite a second or third year associate at another firm. I could certainly outmaneuver them, and I could also treat them in a way that would make them feel insignificant under those circumstances. I try the exact opposite. What I try to do is embrace that moment, make it an opportunity for them to learn something, to come away from that conversation feeling like, wow, there's a person on the other end of this phone call who I can trust, who I can work with, perhaps who I can even learn from. I get so much joy out of doing that because I feel like a lot of times those are interactions that that person will remember and maybe even play it forward.
It's a great aspiration to make all interactions meaningful. Let's go to the beginning. How did you get into this game? Maybe even before the real estate game. What I recall is that you grew up in a small town here in Cumberland, Maryland, but you decided eventually to go to boarding school at Mercersburg Academy. And I've heard you credit Mercersburg with much of your early success. I know you eventually had your own daughter, Susie, go there as well. What made the experience at Mercersburg so meaningful for you?
Well, Mercersburg was and is a great place. When I showed up there in 1969, it was the first year that Mercersburg, which at that point had been founded about 100 years earlier, had admitted women. So there were about 400 boys and about 12 girls in the fall of 1969.
I bet the ratio is a little different now.
It's very different. There are slightly more women than men. Mercersburg was going through a huge period of transition. It was the very end of the 1960s, a very turbulent time. Mercersburg realized that in order to survive, that it needed to become co-ed. And what I quickly found, of course, I couldn't articulate it quite in this way, but what I quickly found and what I have reflected on in years since is that Mercersburg taught me how to take risks. Of course, it was in a very controlled environment, but the opportunity to try things and to do things that I had never done before. And also, there was an added element, which is that I was a Jewish kid in a very non-Jewish environment, and I prospered there. I invested in my Jewish identity, and people knew about my Jewishness, and they wanted to learn more about it. I even taught the school chaplain how to read Hebrew while I was there.
What were some of those risks that you felt comfortable taking in an environment like Mercersburg?
Trying out for the soccer team, for example. I'd never played soccer, so I tried that. I sang in the chapel choir, Todd. I love to sing, and I decided to try out for the chapel choir, and I made it. It was an awkward situation for me, but I did it, and I loved it, and it was one of the highlights of my time at Mercersburg. One of the best parts of my experience there was my 10th grade English teacher, Floyd Robinson, who happened to be the first Black teacher that Mercersburg had ever hired. Floyd was the dorm dean, and he's still my friend today, one of my closest friends. He taught me how to write a cogent sentence. There were 3 people that I learned writing from in my life. Floyd was the first one. I saw some of the challenges that Floyd had as the first and the only Black teacher at Mercersburg at that time. He taught me a lot about how to conduct yourself, about respect, about dignity. He is without a doubt one of the most dignified human beings I've ever come across. Mercersburg is a special place. Its diversity and quality of education there are just incredible.
It must have provided you with a very strong base foundation, because then you went from Mercersburg to Duke University. You followed that with University of Miami Law School. And then you moved from the South back to Washington, D.C. So tell us, what drew you ultimately to the law and back to Washington?
Okay, well, let me just tell you one story about my experience at the University of Miami Law School. The University of Miami was going through a transition. They had brought in Soya Menchikoff, who had been at the University of Chicago. She was very well known. Her husband was the primary author of the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC. Dean Menchikoff came to Miami with the intention of completely turning the law school around. She brought with her several young, extremely talented professors from the University of Chicago. And one of the things that Dean Menchikoff decided she would do would be to try to get more University of Miami Law School graduates to get federal judicial clerkships, which are extremely prestigious. They were very hard to get then. They're very hard to get now. They're just a sign of the quality of the education in a law school. So I just instinctively decided that I was going to get to know Dean Menchikoff right from the beginning, which I did. And early in my second year, I got a call, Dean's office, please come speak to Dean Menchikoff. To make a very long story short, Dean Menchikoff facilitated my getting a judicial clerkship with Judge Paul Roney. And that experience was just life and career changing.
Where was that?
Judge Roney was initially on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which encompassed 6 southern states. They split the Fifth Circuit into 2, became the 11th Circuit. The court headquarters then, as now, was in Atlanta. First half of the year, it was in New Orleans. The clerkship really helped me improve my marketability, full-time jobs. Coming to Washington was a total quirk. My best buddy in law school, who became the best man at my wedding, had an opportunity to take a job in D.C. after graduating. I had an extra year to decide what I was going to do because of the clerkship. I encouraged him very strongly to take this job in D.C., which he really didn't want to do. Then he started to have cold feet. So I said, you know what? I'll come to D.C. I'll study for the bar with you and then kind of see what happens. The day after the bar exam, I walked my resume around to a few law firms. One of them was Shaw Pittman. They interviewed me on the spot and got the job at Shaw Pittman.
And was that right into real estate law?
So at first, I was in a pool where I was doing environmental and securities and litigation and, you name it. And one day they said, okay, Fred, pack your bags because you're going to someplace south of Houston for between 6 and 9 months to do a document review for litigation involving a defectively constructed nuclear power plant. I panicked. I had met a senior associate who was a real estate lawyer a few weeks before who told me that he had some real estate matters, but they weren't going to start for several more weeks. But then I got this phone call and they said, pack your bags. So I completely panicked. I called the guy at home. His name is Steve Hutler, still a friend of mine today. I called Steve and I said, Steve, you got to get me out of this. I don't want to go to Houston. So Steve somehow miraculously got me off the nuclear case. And Steve and I worked together on selling 3 pecan farms in Southwest Georgia and a pecan processing plant. And that began my real estate career. That was for BF Saul Company. So that's really how I got started. And in the 1980s, Shaw Pittman had the most incredible real estate department with several of the partners who were amazingly accomplished, super smart, and just as busy as you could imagine, with an amazing array of clients that included Boston Properties, the BF Saul Company, and Chevy Chase Bank. That experience working for these people who were really terrific business lawyers really got me started. One of the primary partners there, Ted Rogers, who was a grumpy, gruff, kind of grouchy guy, just drilled into us certain basic principles and ways to practice. The most important one being understand your client's business.
What did that mean when he said, understand your client's business?
Well, what it meant was understand what your client's goals are. What's their risk tolerance? What's been their experience before? What type of relationship do they have with the counterparty to the transaction? How long are they going to hold this asset for? I mean, the entire array of considerations that young lawyers often don't think about because they're under so much pressure to get the documents out.
One of the people that you worked with, obviously in the real estate department, was vaunted, and you talked about that and what made it so special with this focus on business. But there were other departments as well in Shaw Pittman, and one of the people that you worked with as a young lawyer there happened to be David Rubenstein, and that was before he decided to leave the law and co-found Carlyle. What was he like at the time, and did you just know that he was likely to be successful?
Well, I think I was a third-year associate at the time that he joined after having left the Carter administration. He was, I think, exploring other opportunities for a year or two. When he arrived at Shaw Pittman, they put him in an office right next door to mine. So I got to know him right away. He was kind of quiet. He's a little reserved. Seemed like a little bit of an introvert at the time. He always showed up in a blue suit and a white shirt and usually a blue or red tie. I think later he started wearing those Hermes ties. He wasn't quite at that point yet. I've told this story many times. I would come into the office, on a Sunday morning with my blue jeans on to work on my legal documents. And I'd poke my head into David's office Sunday morning, and he'd be sitting there with a suit on, with his tie, with his jacket on, not even with his jacket off, and always on the telephone with a lot of newspapers, not just the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, but newspapers from everywhere. And
The Financial Times, I'm sure.
Financial Times, you name it. But the most notable thing, Todd, was the size of his two Rolodexes. Do you know what a Rolodex is, Todd?
I believe it or not, I'm old enough and I have had Rolodexes.
You know what a Rolodex is? All right. So for people who might be listening, a Rolodex is a circular plastic device that holds individual 3x5 cards on which contact information for people is placed. And David's two Rolodexes were the size of like the tires on a truck. And David was constantly on the phone.
Some things have never changed. I think now he might have a third or a fourth Rolodex.
No doubt. So Ramsey Potts, who was one of the founders of the firm, asked me if I would work with David and support David on a very confidential matter that Ramsey was handling for his primary client, Emerson Electric from St. Louis. It was a legislative matter. It was a complicated and very intricate tax issue. So I was supporting David on that. I got to know him through that process. He would occasionally poke his head in my office and say, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "I'm working on my real estate documents." That he'd keep walking. Anyway, one day I'm in my office. It was a weekday and I heard some commotion next door, went around the corner to see what was going on. And David was packing up to leave. And I said, "David, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm leaving." I said, "Where are you going?" And he said, I'm going to team up with a few other people who I know, and we're going to start a firm, and we're going to raise money from wealthy people and invest that money in businesses." And it was at that moment that I made perhaps the biggest and most notable mistake of my professional life, which was not to say, "Can I come?" But off he went. And I'm telling you, Todd, my instincts are pretty good. Maybe 1986-ish.
7. Yeah, 6 or 7. Yep.
I had absolutely no doubt that I was going to be hearing a lot about him in the future, and I was right.
Well, and you've stayed really close with him, which is, I think, one of, it's a testament to both of you, to yours in particular, a willingness and desire to make human interactions meaningful. Let's go back to your career in real estate. You've had a very successful career, 30 plus years, and have grown to be one of the most central and most respected lawyers, advisors in the DC real estate market. And so I'll ask you to reflect, why do you think you were able to have this level of success? What about your approach is different and has led to, people relying on your advice for so many years and in so many ways?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I invest in relationships. And even though I'm a transactional lawyer and what we do is transactional, I've never thought of what I do in those terms.
So how would you describe what you do?
The way I think about it is that I have a partnership with the client. We're partners. If the client is successful, we're successful. If the client is happy, we're happy. If the client is unhappy, we're unhappy. And I want to be right there at every moment when important decisions are made and when things are getting done. Our practice grew because people remember the strength of partnership and they benefited from it. So treat the client as your partner as opposed to just somebody who's going to pay the bill at the very end. The second thing, we have always had a great team, and I have tried extremely hard to make sure that we've always hired the smartest and best people. Even if we didn't have an opening, come across a really smart, talented person, hire them because we'll find something for them to do. And then the third element is my partnership with Jay Epstein. Jay and I met each other in the early 80s at Shaw Pittman. Jay and I became friends. I began to support Jay in his practice, and we've been together for my entire 45-year career. We moved law firms together in 1996. My partnership with Jay has played an extremely meaningful part in my success because it is so helpful, whether you're an attorney or whether you're in business or an investor, to have a buddy, to have somebody that you can do it with, who you trust, who trusts you, and who complements your skills and is able to think the same way or in similar way and make the other person better. So finding a buddy, finding a partner is extremely
And what a
powerful.
partner and a friend that you found in Jay, who went on to run the global real estate practice for DLA and actually now has his own podcast.
Right. Jay was running the global practice and I was on doing the work.
Hi, this is Todd Rich. Thank you for listening to the Declarations podcast, where top investors and business leaders share their insights and provide an independent perspective. We hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Declaration Partners or listen to more episodes of the Declarations podcast, please visit our website at www.declarationpartners.com. And now back to the episode. Now let's talk about your practice a little, because in some ways, and you've alluded to this, your practice was unique in that you had different types of clients, international clientele, but you also represented large institutions like big private equity funds. You represented individual property owners, family offices, or people who would own property directly. Did all of these groups approach the question of real estate in the same way? Did they all have the same business? When you said learn your client's business, did they all focus on the same things, or were there different types of advice that you needed to tailor based on their own needs?
Everyone is different, Todd. You can't even generalize with private equity investors. Each one is different. And, Todd, as well as anyone, how real estate is such a personal business. And so this person who works for this private equity fund may be thinking about real estate in one way, and that person who works for that other private equity fund, although they may seem similar, is going to think about real estate completely differently. Their tolerance for risk is different. They're trying to meet certain investment goals or criterion. And as I said at the outset, learning what they're thinking and understanding what they're thinking is key. So with some private equity investors, what are they trying to do? They're trying to create value, and they have a holding period and have an exit strategy. And you need to really be thinking about that holding period and exit strategy in the context of what you're doing at all times, whether you're negotiating a joint venture agreement, a loan agreement, whatever you're doing. The family investor, and many of the clients I've represented over the years, did not deliberately invest in real estate, but they came into an investment because some ancestor of theirs had wisely bought a land position, had a business that they operated, and perhaps folded it into a larger assemblage for an office development or multifamily. Those kinds of owners, they are investors, but they're really more owners. They're looking at real estate completely differently. They're thinking about absolutely eliminating all risk. They don't want any risk. They want to get their checks every month, predictably, on the first of the month, no matter what. I've had some of those investors also on long-term ground lease negotiations say, every day I want to wake up in the morning and be receiving a market return on my investment. Of course, my response to that is, well, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a magician. I can't do that. But today, and in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, I've worked on some distressed ground lease situations where you actually need to provide a whole different type of advice and to say, you and your family, and your children and your grandchildren are relying on this rent stream, but this original deal was made at a time when receiving this return on that investment was possible, but it's just not possible anymore. So you could make a choice. The building on top of your land has reached the end of its useful life, and there's going to be some time period where there's going to have to be some recalibration. So what would you like to do? Would you like to play hardball and end up owning this property, and then now you're in the active real estate business? Or would you like to perhaps consider relaxing some of the terms and help facilitate a complete redevelopment that will assure you of a return, albeit perhaps a smaller return for your children and grandchildren so that they can be roughly the same position that you were in. And so that's not a discussion that I would be having with a private equity investor. It's not a discussion that I'd be having with Boston Properties. For example, Boston Properties would be on the other side of that situation. And representing public owners of real estate is also a whole different set of considerations. So to answer your question directly, yes, the advice is different depending upon the people and depending upon the institution and their risk tolerance and investment goals and criteria.
In that discussion of these theoretical changes to, potentially a long-term family owner of a ground lease, let's just say, what you implied was that there have actually been quite a lot of changes in the real estate landscape over the past, 30 years. So maybe without looking backwards as to all of the changes that have already occurred, maybe looking forwards, what do you see now? I mean, are there any big risks or big opportunities that you can see now in real estate or in the law, I guess, if you wanted to go that direction? Just things that you think are worth sharing for the audience about how to position oneself for the future.
Well, if I were in the middle or the beginning of my career, I would be spending all my time thinking about artificial intelligence and its relationship in part to the data center business, which an enormous number of people at DLA Piper are now suddenly involved with. I'd be thinking about...
Are they also land speculating like everyone else or no?
So we're involved with a number of clients who are involved with a lot of land speculators, some people who have made enormous amounts of money very quickly in this area. But I'd be thinking about AI and also just generally the availability of information. In terms of what's changed since I started practicing, the instantaneous availability of information, I think, is the most dramatic. People make judgments based upon what they learn or what they see and hear. In the old days, maybe some of the same things were happening, but you didn't know about it. There were always people that I knew in the D.C. area who I always felt like had an advantage because they had more information than anyone else. And the primary example of that was the late Larry Nussdorf. Larry, who ran Clark Construction and Clark Real Estate, I always felt like Larry was the one person who could get any information that he wanted or needed at any time, virtually instantaneously, because he could call people in the industry or somebody on his team could call whoever they wanted in the industry, and they were very happy to share the information. Today, everybody seems to have the information within seconds of something happening. And so, although information is valuable and key, figuring out how to have that information and how to use it effectively and profitably is very important.
Do you see artificial intelligence, therefore, as a tool to gather information, or as a fundamental threat to the legal industry, or as an opportunity in real estate?
I view it as a complete opportunity, and I'm kind of sad that I'm, winding down my career because I think artificial intelligence is such an amazing thing, and I wish that I could be part of what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years to really figure out how to use it better and more effectively. I don't think of developments and innovation as a threat. I view it as an opportunity. And I've told my colleagues, we need to make sure that we are way ahead of the curve here. How do we use AI? We need to use AI better than the next law firm. And my colleagues in our real estate group in particular, in our corporate group, have done a great job of learning and embracing the opportunity. We're using AI in a lot of different ways in my law firm. So I view it as an opportunity. And the availability of information, if you know how to use it and can use it profitably, that's a huge advantage too.
Now, let's go back to one of the things that you've talked about, where you've talked about the power of relationships and how you fostered them. I'm struck a little bit by this full-throated excitement about AI. and the contrast, I guess, between this excitement about artificial intelligence and then for you, what I see as really deeply personal and meaningful relationships. And how does one work to foster those relationships? And does it need to change in the future?
Well, I've told my younger colleagues in my group that there are certain, at least in my business and, and being a real estate lawyer, there are certain things that don't change. If you're going to be an advisor, a counselor, you have to engender trust. You have to be in sync with what your client is thinking. I don't think that's going to change. Basic principles that I learned from people like Ted Rogers back at Shaw Pittman in the 1980s about knowing and feeling comfortable about telling your client, you're thinking about doing this, but I think you should do it this other way. And also being able to say to a client at a critical juncture, we could do this path A, we could do this path B, or we could do this path C. Those are the choices, and here are the pros and cons. I would take path B, and here's why. And if the client says, well, you know what, I'm really thinking about path A, say, okay, stand your ground, tell the client why you disagree, but then make path A happen and give it your absolute best. Things like that in my business, they don't change. I think that AI and other developments will only enhance the ability to get the job done faster, perhaps more efficiently with the benefit of more information. But the basic principles and the basic style about how to foster those relationships, I really don't think is going to change that much.
So no more of a threat than the fax machine. It makes things quicker, but fundamentally the advice is based on legal principles, on relationship principles, and just good old-fashioned advice.
And I think your reputation is everything. Having a reputation for people being able to trust you, for people knowing that they can rely upon you in our business, which I think is always going to be people-oriented, I think is critically important.
Let's talk about the people-oriented side. I know you've spent a lot of time, and you and I personally have spent a lot of time talking about personal growth. You talk about genuine expressions of gratitude. I know this, and people who know, you often express them with handwritten letters. You're the best letter writer and most prolific, perhaps, in our industry. Why is this so important to you?
Well, first of all, in terms of expressing gratitude, I've learned a lot from a guy who's not really thought of as a philosopher. He's really more thought of as a wrestler, John Cena, who is a wonderful philosopher. He's got a terrific book, a little blue book. Maybe you've seen it. It's called Be a Work in Progress and Other Things I'd Like to Tell My Younger Self. I highly recommend it to you and to your listeners.
John Cena, the philosopher.
And he writes a lot and talks a lot about expressing gratitude because it's real. Because as we look around us, we should all be grateful for the blessings that we have. There's a spiritual element to it. And as you know, I'm always happy to share the spiritual side of experiences. And I know that people often feel comfortable with somebody who is willing to expose themselves a little bit, to speak in a personal and real way. And because I invest so much in relationships, and because it's a sincere investment in those relationships, learning how to sit down with my terrible penmanship, but my nice stationery, to take the time to write a note. And I learned about this more than 40 years ago from another one of the partners at Shaw Pittman, somebody who was not in my group. I lost my dad in July of 1983. And a week or two later, when I returned to the office, there was a handwritten note on my desk from a guy named Nat Breed. And I'll never forget this. I told Nat a good bit about my dad over time, just shooting the breeze. I never had worked with Nat. And it was the kindest, most thoughtful expression. He was expressing his condolences to me on my loss, and it touched my heart. And I was like, man, I got to do that. I've often explored, and this is very personal, why do I do it? And a big part of it is how that expression of caring that Nat Breed expressed more than 40 years ago, how that made me feel. And as I've learned how to do it, and as I've expressed gratitude or sympathy or just friendship, I can't tell you how many times I've received feedback, received something back in kind, or even when I don't, I know how people feel when they receive it. And it's a great joy of mine. I love doing it. I've exchanged, I don't know if I've told you this before, Todd, but I've exchanged many, many letters with David Rubenstein over the last 30 years. And every time I sent him a note, he writes back every single time. There has never been a time that I didn't send him a note about something or other that he didn't respond to me. And I think he appreciates that and understands that. And I think that's something that's important to him as well. He's a pretty good role model, I would
Maybe
say.
one day people will read your letters back and forth in the same way that they read Jefferson and Adams' letters.
Well, I've saved every letter that I've received from David. Few of them are very personal, and I treasure them.
Well, I will take this opportunity to express something that I have already expressed to you on many occasions, including in letters. And I would like to thank you, Fred, for your own role in my own personal growth in this journey, and specifically for introducing me to David for the purpose of creating Declaration. I'm forever grateful, and I hope you know that I mean that sincerely.
I do. I appreciate your reminding me from time to time. That expression of gratitude is much appreciated.
Well, one of the reasons that I remind you from time to time is something else that you taught me, which is that relationships, you've said, are not 50-50. Some people think of relationships as being, good relationships are relationships of equality, 50-50. And you have often said they aren't 50-50. They're 60-40. And what you really mean by that is that one needs to give more than 50%. You said 60% in order to get something of meaning in return. And it's that the giving is more important than the receiving. That's always stuck with me. I've tried, since you've taught me that, I've tried my best to give 60% or more when I can. I'm thankful that you taught me that.
I appreciate your saying that, Todd. And it is true. And you've got to have the courage and the fortitude sometimes to give a little bit more. But really, that 40 grows exponentially over time. And it does sound transactional, but it isn't really, because you get so much more back than you give over time. It just works that way.
Now let's talk about the next time period in your life. So at the end of this year, you're going to transition from DLA Piper and your career in law, I guess. You're going to celebrate, we just had a party to celebrate what you call your non-retirement. So what's next for you?
Well, I think I've overprogrammed myself, Todd. I'm going to be so busy, almost too busy. The latest thing that I've decided to embark on is I just accepted an adjunct professor position at Georgetown Law School. I'm going to teach a 3-hour class on, believe it or not, real estate transactions. So that's going to involve a good bit of work. I'm really looking forward to it. One of the things that I've learned and read about and have been advised as I embark on my 8th decade, I just turned 70 last October, is to try to spend as much time as possible around younger people. And so this will accomplish that. Also, this takes me out of my comfort zone a little bit. I've done some spot teaching in the past, but I've never been responsible for an entire class. So that's going to get started at the end of August. I serve on the board of Mercersburg Academy. I'm in the middle of a $100 million series of capital improvement projects for Mercersburg. We just interviewed a series of project managers and selected one to oversee this process. And I anticipate being very involved in that going forward, in addition to some fundraising, which I've helped the school do from time to time in the past. I'm on the board of the National Theater, as you know, and we've had several major initiatives there and one remaining that still needs to get taken care of. And I serve as pro bono counsel to the National Theater, very heavily involved with the Children's Law Center, which is a very meaningful activity for me that you're familiar with as well. A really terrific community-based organization in D.C. that helps the most needy kids in the city with a lot of programming. And Children's Law Center is under huge pressure right now because of recent legislative changes.
So Fred, do you need to be rich to be a philanthropist? I know this is something you've always felt strongly about. That
It helps to be super rich.
is that the only way to give?
Absolutely not. Your time is, and that's what I do, Todd. these various activities that I've devoted hundreds, perhaps thousands of hours to, first of all, I derive an enormous amount of personal satisfaction from the things that I do for these various entities. And the thanks that you get back when you spend time and accomplish something and get something done that your expertise plays a critical role in accomplishing, the gratitude that you get back in return is just overwhelming. It is so meaningful. I just had that at Mercersburg. The school's chief financial officer told me just last week when we finished up a 30-page, pretty complex project management agreement. She said, "We couldn't have gotten this done without you." And, it's great to collect $1 million legal fee. Haven't done too many of those, but every once in a while to collect $1 million legal fee, that's pretty cool. But to have somebody who represents an institution that I deeply respect and that I feel like I'm a part of and have been for more than 50 years to tell me that something important got done that they couldn't have gotten done without me, that means everything. So that
No
brand of
surprise.
philanthropy, that brand of philanthropy is so cool. If I had another spare $20 million to give Mercersburg so we could get rolling on constructing our science and innovation center, that would be cool, but I don't.
Well, maybe a listener may, but in the meantime, I want to say, Fred, that it is no surprise to me that when asked a question about how to help others and how to give, you answered in a manner that reflected the human interactions and what makes them meaningful to you. So consistent through and through.
I appreciate that.
It's now time for the standard closing questions. So tell us, Fred, a book that most influenced your thinking or personal development. And we really only have time for one or two books. I know you're an avid reader, but just one or two books that really influenced your thinking and personal development.
Well, so most recently, a book by Arthur Brooks, who he's hard to characterize. Would you call him a social scientist?
He's done so many things, and I think I know which book you're about to recommend because I think we actually shared it with one another.
Yes. So the book is called Strength to Strength. It's a wonderful book. Brooks describes, the 3 stages of life. I'm in the third. It's about a life devoted to spirituality, service, and wisdom. That's what I'm trying to achieve in this third tranche of my life. And there's another little book called The Happiness Advantage. I think I told you about that one too. Sean Acor.
Yeah, I've read that. Yep.
And it's a great book. Highly recommend it. It's a very easy read. The Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks is not very long, but you can spend an enormous amount of time reading it because every page, every sentence is just packed full of some really terrific philosophy. So those are great books. One of my other activities is I joined a book club that only reads fiction, and I don't read fiction that often. So that's another one of my activities that's gotten underway this year.
Thank you for that. Now, the best advice that you ever received from your parents or that you give to your own kids?
The best advice, Todd, is being in control of your own life to the extent that you can be. As an adult, even as a young adult, don't let other people or situations control you. You be in charge of yourself. And that concerns your personal life, your professional life, particularly your career. Who am I and what am I doing and what brings me joy in my life? And don't let somebody else make your decisions for you. It's critically important to your happiness. And that's the best advice I receive and the best advice that I can give. And it's advice that I've given many, many times.
And it's a perfect transition to our final question. The Declaration of Independence talks about freedom for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, Fred, what do you do in pursuit of happiness?
I'll take us back to where we started about an hour ago, which is about making human interactions meaningful. That gives me great joy, Todd. When I do that, even at the most mundane level, that's the ultimate in happiness for me. And second, and equal, is interactions with our 3 adult children and my brand new grandson. What brings me incredible joy is listening to my kids. And I do that every day. I talk to my kids every day, even though they're scattered around, as you know. But listening to my kids, being there for them. That is the ultimate in happiness for me.
Fred, no surprise. I hope you found this interaction as meaningful as I did. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your friendship and your mentorship. And thank you for joining this podcast today.
Thank you, Todd. I feel honored to be part of it, and I appreciate your kind words very much. Thank you.
This podcast is provided for discussion and informational purposes only, for use by Declaration Partners, LP, together with its affiliates, referred to as Declaration. The information discussed in this podcast may change at any time without notice, and there is no duty by Declaration to update any person to whom this information is provided. This podcast does not constitute an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to purchase any investment product or any interest in the fund or any other investment vehicles or accounts managed or advised by Declaration, a Declaration investment product, in any jurisdiction to any person. Any such offer or solicitation for interest in any Declaration investment product will only be made pursuant to such Declaration investment product's definitive offering documents, which contain a description of the material terms, including risk factors, conflicts of interest, fees and charges, and regulatory and tax considerations relating to such Declaration investment product, and which should be reviewed carefully by potential investors prior to making an investment decision. This podcast does not constitute tax or legal advice. The listener is urged to consult a professional tax and/or legal advisors regarding the possible tax, legal, economic, regulatory, or other risks and consequences associated with any investment, and must be able to bear the risks involved. This podcast may contain certain forward-looking statements which constitute Declaration's views with respect to future events, which can be identified by the use of forward-looking terminology such as intend, seek, expect, target, project, or endeavor. These statements are made based upon such views as they exist as of the date herein. There is no assurance that such views are correct or will prove, with the passage of time, to be correct. Actual events or results may differ materially from those contemplated by such forward-looking statements as a result of factors beyond Declaration's control, including, without limitation, any disruptions in global, regional, or local financial, credit, or real estate markets, acts of God, fire, hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, earthquakes, or other natural disasters, outbreaks of an infectious disease, pandemic, or any other serious public health concern, war, terrorism, labor strikes, electricity shortages, or other national or local emergencies, or any combination of the foregoing. David M. Rubenstein is an anchor investor in Declaration Partners Real Estate Fund II and is not an employee of Declaration. Neither the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission nor the Securities Regulatory Authority of any state or other jurisdiction has passed upon the accuracy or adequacy of this podcast. No compensation has been awarded to any speaker for statements made that are either testimonials or endorsements. However, certain speakers may be current or former investors in certain Declaration investment products and may receive reduced fees, priority terms, priority access, co-investment rates, among other preferential treatment, which may pose a conflict of interest. Certain speakers may also be affiliates and/or service providers that receive compensation from Declaration for services provided in their service provider capacity, but have not been compensated specifically for any testimonials or endorsements made herein. All statements made on the podcast are the opinions and beliefs of the speaker and may not necessarily represent the opinions, beliefs, and position of Declaration. Consequently, from the foregoing, no reliance whatsoever should be placed on this podcast, and no decision including any investment decision should be made based on this podcast or on the information contained herein.